The induction hall on Halcyon Spire could seat 400 cadets, and on the first morning of the new term it was full to the rafters with every species the Coalition counted as citizens. Crests and tails and chitinous shoulders, translators murmuring in a dozen languages, the smell of ozone and unfamiliar pheromones thick enough to taste. She came in last, after the doors had already cycled twice, and took the one open seat in the back row without looking at anyone. Small, quiet, hands folded on the desk in front of her. If a human instructor had glanced her way, they'd have seen nothing remarkable. Just another cadet, slight and tired-looking, waiting for orientation to begin. No predator in that room made the same mistake twice. POV. Kadrin Voss Thurl, Threx cadet. Kadrin didn't decide to look at her. His body did it for him. He'd spent 19 years learning to read a room the way his ancestors read a hunting ground. Weight distribution, breathing rate, the angle a creature held its head when it thought no one was watching. Threx warrior caste cadets were drilled on threat assessment before they could properly walk. He'd swept the hall in 4 seconds, filing every species present into columns. Prey, predator, unknown, harmless. His eyes caught on the human girl in the back row and refused to move on. He ran the assessment twice. Mass, negligible. Visible weapons, none. Musculature, unremarkable, almost soft. Every metric his instructors had ever drilled into him said pray, said ignore, said move to the next threat in the room. His instincts said something else entirely, and 19 years of training had taught him not to argue with them. It was the stillness, not the calm of a creature unaware of danger. He'd seen that kind back home, in herd animals, in the seconds before the kill. This was different. This was the stillness of something that had already counted every exit in the hall, already clocked him watching her, and decided he wasn't worth the energy of reacting to. He leaned toward the cadet beside him. Tell me you see it too. His packmate followed his gaze and went very quiet. I see a human. Look again. POV, Sava 9th litter, Vern cadet. Sava smelled the room before she saw it, the way all Vern did, and the room told her a story her eyes hadn't caught up to yet. 200 cadets, freshly nervous, and the air was thick with it. The sour, sharp tang of adrenaline and sweat, the particular bitterness of young creatures trying not to show fear in front of strangers. To a Vern nose, it was a perfectly ordinary first day, a symphony of small anxieties, except for one note missing from the chord. She tracked the gap to the back row, to a human sitting motionless with her hands folded, and found nothing. Not masked fear, not suppressed fear, nothing at all. The way a sealed room has no weather. Sava's instincts, built over 10,000 generations to read fear in others, simply returned no data, and the absence rang louder in her skull than any scent could have. Prey that doesn't smell afraid isn't prey. It's something else wearing prey's shape, and a pack hunter's oldest law was simple. When you can't read it, you don't approach it, you watch it, and you let it move first. Sava found a seat with a clear line of sight to the girl, and didn't look away again. POV. Rikuesh, Kathir cadet. Rikuesh hunted the old way, back on the home reefs, not with speed or strength, but with a patience so absolute it had its own word in his language, one that meant roughly the stillness that outlasts stillness. Kathir ambush predators didn't chase. They waited for the tell, the half-second flinch, the eye flick toward an exit, the micro-shift in weight before flight. He watched the human girl for the better part of an hour, the way he'd once watched tide pools for entire days, and she gave him nothing. No flinch, no tell. Her eyes moved exactly once every several seconds, sweeping the room in a slow, deliberate pattern he recognized immediately, because it was his pattern, the sweep of something cataloging threats, not something hiding from them. He had spent his whole life learning to find the half-second before a creature broke. She didn't have one, or she had buried it deeper than even a Kathir's patience could reach. For the first time since his hatching, Rikuesh decided a target wasn't worth the wait. The decision unsettled him more than any hunt of his life ever had. The test. It was Kadrin who finally moved, because Threk's pride could only carry so much unease before it curdled into something it had to act on. He crossed the hall during the break, deliberately loud, and planted both clawed hands flat on her desk hard enough to make the metal ring. Around them, the noise of the hall dropped by half. Humans, he said, pitched for an audience. I'm told you lost your taste for fighting after the reclamation. That the survivors came out the other side soft, tame. He leaned in, close enough that his breath stirred her hair. Is that what you are? Tame? She looked up. It was the first time anyone in the hall had seen her eyes directly, and Kadrin would spend a long while afterward trying to describe what was wrong with them and failing. because nothing was wrong with them in any way his species had a word for. They were simply, completely without fear, and worse, without anger. She looked at him the way a soldier looks at terrain, calculating, already finished calculating. "You're standing closer to me," she said quietly, than anyone in Ghost Company let the last 12 Threx get. The silence that followed had weight to it. Kadrin's hindbrain, 19 years of warrior instinct, the same instinct that had flagged her from across the room that morning, screamed at him to step back. For once in his life, he listened to it before his pride could argue. POV. Ren Calloway. Human cadet. Ren had picked the back row on purpose, the same way she picked every seat in every room since the reclamation ended. Closest exit on the left, clear sightline to both doors, nothing fragile within arm's reach that a startled stranger might grab and use. Old habits. The kind the war hadn't given her so much as carved into her. She'd felt them tracking her before she'd even finished sitting down. The reptile near the front who'd reorganized his whole posture the moment he saw her. The pale-eyed one by the window whose head kept turning her way across 40 feet of recycled air. The quiet one in the corner who hadn't blinked in what felt like an hour. She didn't need coalition sensors to recognize predator attention. She'd spent 3 years learning to feel it on her skin like a change in pressure before a storm, back when missing the feeling meant somebody didn't come home. She hadn't expected to miss it, the watching, but there was something almost restful in sitting still and finally being read correctly. Not as harmless, not as soft, but as exactly what she was. It had been a long time since anyone looked at her and got it right on the first try. When the Threx's hands hit the desk, she didn't flinch. She'd had worse things than a nervous cadet in her face before breakfast. Roll call. The instructor was an old Vern, gray-muzzled, a war veteran who'd flown gunship sorties during the reclamation and rarely raised her voice for anything. She read down the roster without incident until she reached the human section, where she paused, just slightly, just long enough for the room to notice. Calloway W. The girl in the back row raised one hand, unhurried. The instructor's eyes lingered on her a half-second longer than protocol required, and something crossed her weathered face that the younger cadets couldn't name, but the older predators in the room, the ones who'd flown combat during the war, recognized instantly. Respect. The particular, wary respect one apex predator offers another. Specialist Ren Calloway, the instructor said, mostly to herself, mostly for the record. 3rd Battalion, Ghost Company. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Every coalition species in that war had heard the name Ghost Company in debriefings, usually followed by a body count nobody liked reading aloud. By the time the murmur finished traveling through the hall, Kadrin understood, with the particular clarity of a predator who has just learned what his instincts had been trying to tell him all morning. She hadn't been hiding in the back row out of fear. She'd picked it because it was the seat with the clearest view of every door in the room, and because she'd learned, a long time ago, in places this hall's polished floors would never have to know about, that the most dangerous thing in any room is rarely the one everyone is watching. It's the one no one thought to.